I like the idea of this. This is a thought. Okay, so you remember the Obey posters with Andre the Giant on them?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. I want one that has like the false Hydra on it that says "Listen" underneath.
that's
And
good.
first thing up on the show is going to be a crit think, and it's something that I've been thinking about recently after watching a video. So I wanted to go over it with you, Alex, and get your thoughts on it.
Sure
Um,
thing. What
sure.
video did you watch? That's what I want to know.
Okay, so I was watching a Monster of the Week video from Dungeon Dad. And what he does is basically takes monsters that were not necessarily in 5e, but were in earlier versions of Dungeons and Dragons, and talks about like the story hooks and such, but also creates like 5e's stat blocks and everything for them, so that you
Okay.
could use them in the modern day. And he happened to have one that looked very interesting about what it he said could be the most infamous monster in D&D history, which was the false Hydra. Now,
Oh, that name rings a bell.
yeah, but maybe it doesn't if there happens to be a false Hydra around. So, one of the story hooks, I'll just start with basically the setup. One of the setups he basically used for a story hook. So your adventuring party uh, is sitting around a tavern. They receive a letter from one of your mentors, somebody that you used to know.
Sure, some contact.
Yeah, and that letter says something to the effect of, "You must help. I know they are in danger, but I can't remember why." And so it's supposed to kind of lead you to a town uh, where there is essentially a false Hydra that has been growing in power and strength.
Okay.
And to explain kind of what that is, imagine kind of an amorphous blob that has like a head that comes up that just has like two big open like black eyes and one big mouth.
So
And
black-eyed blob, got it.
exactly. Um, but the thing that kind of makes it very uh, suspicious, very dangerous, is that it basically keeps singing a song that makes it imperceivable while it's singing
Okay.
the song. Uh,
So it's a mimetic hazard.
I guess so. The way that they describe it is so as it's singing the song, it doesn't really make it invisible. What it does is it makes it completely imperceivable. Like it could be in front of you, and there's just no way for you to understand it because the song masks its entire appearance. But
It's kind of like the concept from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy of the somebody else's problem field.
okay, we'll go with
Or
that.
the chameleon circuit that Doctor Who uses for the TARDIS.
Yeah, I guess so. But it does get a little bit more complex than that, which
Of course. I'm just saying it's similar. It's
sure,
not perceivable even though it's there.
even though it's there. Yeah. So the way that they describe this, though, that makes it real insidious, and the reason why it's so dangerous is that it still feeds on people. It still eats people. So when it gets up close, it obviously can't sing its song anymore when it's trying to kill somebody. So,
Right, that would be broken.
right. So anyone that was seeing the false Hydra at that point would see the person getting eaten or killed. But as soon as the song starts back up, the very notion of that person who was there, who is no longer there, or the perception that you saw the false Hydra, starts to strip out of your memory entirely.
Okay, so it affects your memory of itself.
Right, right. And the
We're gonna label
memory,
this one
yeah,
cognito hazard.
yes. And the memory of the person that has now been killed. Like you don't remember why they're not
Okay.
there at all.
Yeah, it's like in the SCP Foundation, this would be considered like an anti-mimetic.
Sure, sure. Like actually, we had talked about the Mandela effect. It's sort of
Mm-hmm.
like that, but like on a much more like individual scale. Like, well, where
Right.
did the priest go? Well, he must. Well, I know that we have a church, and there was a priest here. He must have gone to a neighboring town, and we haven't gotten a new priest yet.
Yeah, and then it becomes what priest?
Exactly. What
Yeah.
priest? What are you talking about? Because there's all of these gaps in logic around it. And the false Hydra starts to grow other heads as it goes, and eventually gets to a point where it can just have the heads kind of coming up through sewer grates or whatever, and
Okay.
just send its song off to everyone, and eventually enthrall people to try and get people to come to have them bring people to their town.
Now the question is, how far does that song go?
It can well, it depends on how big the Hydra gets
I
because
guess that's fair.
it can grow to like a gigantic size over the course of time where it has to eat a lot of people daily just to
Yeah.
survive.
Now
Um,
here's the other question: is
yeah,
it mobile?
it can't really move very well. Like it can patrol the streets, but once it gets to a gigantic size, it can't really like shuffle off. So what it has to do is get its thrall humans to move it to the next town.
Before it consumes, so it kind of like
Yeah.
enslaves them.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And so you could conceivably have your adventuring party go into this town where it cannot perceive of this giant Hydra, this false Hydra, but then get attacked by people if you try to kill the Hydra because the Hydra has enslaved all the people in the town.
I think it's actually funnier. I think a better hook for that would be having the party unknowingly
Mm.
move this Hydra around for it.
Yeah, without even knowing.
So if it's imperceivable and it makes you forget about it,
Mm-hmm.
have the party encounter it, wipe their memory of it, and have them being like, "Yeah, we're just transporting this crate.
Yeah, they're just transporting the
We
crate
just
around.
have a quest to transport this crate to the other town."
Yeah, we don't know
And so
why.
you have no, if they, there are these difficult checks, you have them maybe think there's something weird about the crate,
Yeah.
unless you get a really good roll.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have them bring this crate to their town, and it's really just the Hydra.
Yeah.
And they bring it to another town, and then have them find out later that, oh no, we've been enthralled by this thing, and oh shit, we have to right or wrong. I think that's a way better use of that.
That probably is, but but the reason why this is a crit think is really because it brought up an interesting question for me as I'm thinking about this. Because one of the things that Dungeon Dad was mentioning on that is like, how do the players figure out that there's a false Hydra in this town if the song is going on and you can't perceive it while it's there? Well, there are obviously some spells that you might utilize. One of them would be silence, because if you
Sure.
create silence in an area either where the Hydra is, where it's singing, or around your party, it deafens you.
Sure.
So you can't hear the song, and then all of a sudden it becomes perceptible.
Sure.
all
I
over the
think another
place.
spell you could actually utilize for that, not per spell description, but per spell what it actually does.
Mm.
Um, I think Zone of Truth.
Oh, a zone of truth. Okay.
If you were to use that in the vicinity of where the Hydra is, that's imperceivable, but you were to say use Zone of Truth, I would say I would let a party get away with that, saying, yeah, this thing concealing itself, Zone of Truth doesn't technically function as like a, oh, you can see it, but I think it would work because instead of being imperceivable and like hiding its identity, it would be suddenly like, oh, this is the true creature.
Yeah. 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 There's a lot of things too. If you have somebody who was deaf that was in town and you were able to use sign language or communicate with them somehow, they would be able to tell you that there is this monstrous horror that's all over town
Yeah.
that nobody else seems to believe that is there. Or that, these gaps in logic don't make any sense. And I remember when this person was there at the tavern. I remember the barmaid that was there, and they're not there anymore.
That's an interesting part too, is if the song is what makes people forget, is it continued exposure to the song? If they stop hearing the song, do they remember? Or is it just that if they've heard the song, they've forget. No longer they're exposed to it, the more about that they forget.
That's an interesting idea too. Yeah, if you removed said false Hydra from this whole thing, would they eventually remember these people that were lost, or is it just the continuous part of that that is the illusion?
I
Uh,
think also another hook there would be to have the town have missing people posters
mm-hmm.
from the town,
Yeah.
but the residents of the town don't remember who these people are.
Right.
So
Right.
they're like, there are these posters for these missing, children, because those are generally what you see more than adults, typically in that type of situation. Or just like this person's gone missing. We haven't seen them since this date, which turns out to be months ago. And then you ask
Sure.
people about that thing, because maybe your hook is to find these missing people, and you ask people in the town about them, and they have no idea who these people are. They're like, I've never seen that person in my life that says they live here, and we don't know.
Yeah.
Because then you've got, okay, well, what's going on? These people are missing from this town, but nobody here remembers them. So either they're all in on it for as a thought process,
Mm.
or perhaps those people aren't real.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
then if you were to get people from outside the town normally, like a passing through merchant being like, oh yeah, I remember seeing that person once.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a fuzzy memory because they haven't been exposed to that song as long. So that
Right.
would be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but the real question that arose from all of this was, and maybe just because I happen to be playing a bard, and bards have very, very music based abilities, is how would I rectify this if I received that note? Because my character may not know what a false Hydra is, but I very much now do know what a false Hydra is. So I
I mean,
receive, yeah.
you yourself, not the player. Like, if I were to say, introduce that false Hydra in the game we're playing, I
Mm,
obviously would not tell you that, hey, I'm going to have a false Hydra in this game.
right, but
So, players that don't know it's there shouldn't know it. But once you learn that is a thing, you'll be looking out for it.
right, like because if I saw that letter going back to I know they are in danger, but I can't remember why, and I started to see those cues. If I if I'm familiar with the lore as a player, I'll be starting to think about, like, ooh, how can I address that problem? But my character doesn't necessarily know what the hell this is at
Yeah.
all. And so as a bard, that got me into a really interesting query. Like, okay, if I'm going to this town and I as the player are like, I think this might be a false Hydra situation, I'm going to want to have some spells ready that are going to disrupt this song. That would be my normal thought process. However, the character would not necessarily know that or think to have those spells available to them.
It's a sticky situation between what your character presumes they might need, especially for spellcasters where you have to prepare the spells ahead of time.
Mm,
It's a matter of figuring out what spells might you need over the next time period versus what you typically take. Like if you have a general spell list you take
yeah,
and then you change it, like I think we might like be dealing with this.
sure.
And for instance, that shouldn't be a big deal, especially a spontaneous caster who has access to all their spells. Swapping up their spell list isn't a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And having them swap their spell list up to potentially deal with something they perceive as a threat coming
Yeah,
is honestly a great idea. It's where you
right,
get into the semantics of, okay, as a player, I feel like this character might get into this situation,
right,
but this character has no idea about this situation.
right,
So, do you need to justify it in character?
right.
Or can you hand wave it away and just say, for the brevity of the game and your character's sake and for fun,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, go ahead, do that. I want to do this because it makes sense to me as a player.
Okay.
It's one of those kind of gray areas if it's like a real like survival type game, for instance, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh yes, keep track of all your food and all your weight. I would say you have no clues about this. You have no reason to be prepared for this,
Hmm.
unless it's something you would, as as your character would be prepared for it.
Yeah.
In the case that like you're not really prepared for finding a trap, you've never found a trap, you have no, it's one of those things. Um, but that's like such a just specific case
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it would be right to punish a player or a character for saying, "Oh, I'm gonna switch up my spells because maybe this will come in handy."
You're
Like
right.
that's should be fine in most cases,
Sure. Sure.
unless it's super specific and it's like, ah,
Yeah.
yes, I took a spell, um, to ward off mind flayers, and it's like,
Yeah.
what reason do you have to suspect you're coming in contact with mind flayers?
Well, I read the stat block.
It's like I read the adventure ahead of time, and it
Yeah.
would be like, you cannot take that spell
No,
now.
sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. You ruin everything.
Right, because I worry about like influencing the game because of metagaming as a general rule, and it feels like the more you learn about monsters and like the intricacies of the world as a player, it becomes harder to remove yourself as a character from the game. So I start to think to myself, like, okay, well, what are typical monsters that we're going to deal in the area that we're currently in? Are you
Right.
around Neverwinter? Yeah. And,
But in the instance of a false Hydra, where if it A obscures its presence,
mhm,
B it's forgettable,
yeah,
the only way you would really like know about that is from like learning about it ahead of time
exactly. Or if you had encountered them at some point in the past
and not forgotten about it.
and not forgotten about it because maybe you killed it. And
Right.
because you killed it. Yeah, yeah,
Um, so in those cases, it's interesting because, yeah, as you said, separating the player knowledge from the character knowledge is important in a lot of cases. I don't think it's game breaking,
mm-hmm,
um, but I think it should be one of the communication things between the player and the games master,
sure,
where it's, hey, I think this is a situation that might be coming up. Like, I think this sounds like a false Hydra, but my character doesn't know anything about those.
yeah,
So maybe either work something out with the GM,
mm-hmm,
um, or say, perhaps you could be like, all right, well, I want to do this because of that, but I also don't want it to be super effective because there's no reason I should know about that. Working out some kind of compromise should work.
sure,
Um, but it is definitely, especially with a really unique monster like that,
yeah,
like that players really wouldn't know about unless you've had it, or you, again, if we talked about it here. Let's say you're running a game with people who listen to this podcast.
sure,
Okay? Let's
mm-hmm,
let's say you and I have now talked about it, and Graveyard is sitting next to me over here, and she's heard about the false Hydra now as well, a
yeah,
bit, at least one half this conversation.
sure,
So if I were to add this to the game, you guys would know what it is,
sure,
but your
yeah.
characters would have no idea what this is.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because like I kind of settled on the fact that it's more important for the story that the character's knowledge takes precedence over the player's knowledge.
It does.
So,
The
yeah,
players are the ones running the characters, but the characters are the one the story is about.
right. So at the end of the day, like me as player would say I'd want something like silence or just something sound based if I thought I could disrupt sound in general. I don't know if like my thunder spells might work for something like that, but I think it would be kind of like a crapshoot, honestly, if I tried. But the thing about it is, I would normally think to do that, but I kind of settled on the fact that even if I was pretty sure, like 50, like 60, 70% sure that a false Hydra was going to be a big story hook for the adventure, I still probably wouldn't pick silence as a spell for my character because I wouldn't because my character just simply would not be familiar with that, and I know that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what the overall thing is. Is your character? Would your character
Mm.
do that? Is that something they would do? And you have to kind of internalize it and be like, well, would my character really take silence if he's a bard? It's like he probably wouldn't take silence. He might take something else, sound based and disruptive, but probably not silence.
Sure, yeah. And that's the thing, too, is that, like, playing a bard, that's the class that is most likely to have abilities that are sound based in their repertoire. So you would think that if anyone was going to be familiar with it, the only thing I could justify is that if Max or some other um, bard actually from telling tales and knowing lore and stuff was familiar with creatures like that. Uh,
I
you know.
think something you could do as a games master in that case would be to have notes around town, perhaps.
Mm,
Some sort of findable set dressing pieces,
mm,
some knowledge, obscure knowledge that might give hints.
yeah,
Because, if these people don't forget it instantly and they kind of have notes saying, oh, yeah, there's this weird song, or another person went missing, but then they have no recollection of these notes being left
yeah.
because it erases their memory of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that, diary entries, findable things in that nature, I think would help. If you made it more investigative than just monster hunting, I
Sure.
think you could do a lot more with it.
Yeah, I like the idea of this. This is a thought. Okay, so you remember the Obey posters with Andre the Giant on them?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. I want one that has like the false Hydra on it that says "Listen" underneath.
that's
and,
good.
and those would be like posted by somebody who was not like influenced by the sound. Like maybe they have tinnitus or something, and so it like disrupts the song in some way so that
Sure.
it doesn't actually affect them, and they're just putting them in back alleys to try and
Yeah,
warn people about it. Yeah, that would be kind of fun. I think that
that
there's
needs that
scenarios you
needs to be
can.
the thumbnail. Is just a false Hydra obey poster
Yeah,
that just says "listen."
yeah, it just says listen. But yeah, so I mean, hey, if you want to get eaten by an amorphous blob with giant teeth, hey, there's something that you can
I'm
do.
wondering how an amorphous blob has teeth. By the way,
Well, because it's kind of just a big ball, but then there's a head. There's like a big neck, and so the teeth and the eyes just come out of the top of
yeah,
the
okay,
neck.
sure. Blobs can make teeth. It's fine.
It's okay. At some point,
It's okay.
maybe I'll have a graphic at some point up here so people can visualize it. On
Great.
the,
Find something horrifying, put it up on screen, but
you know,
censor it. But just completely censor it so no one can be sure they don't know what it looks like because it
yeah,
erases.
I'll blur it. I'll blur it
Yeah,
slightly.
blur
That's
it.
perfect. Okay, so did we kind of settle on the fact that the player has to just be okay with the character not knowing?
I think so, but again, it is a crit thing. So I think we're gonna pass this off to you listeners
Exactly.
and let us know what you think about this situation, I guess.
Yeah.
Or let us know what you think about the false Hydra in general. That's a really cool concept that I think you could have a lot of fun with as long as you don't tell your players it's a false Hydra ahead of time.
Yeah. Question in general, though, I'm gonna pass along is how do you rectify player versus character knowledge? Because I'm trying to figure out how we really do that because it is very difficult to separate role playing in its general form
Let-
and
Let's
knowledge.
let's specify in this situation because player versus character knowledge broadly is a very big topic.
Okay. So how does your player and or character deal with a false hydra?
There you go. Something along those lines. You guys can figure out the question. You're critical thinkers.
Exactly. You spazzed out there for a second. I think the false hydra might have gotten to your stream. So there's
Who are
kind of
you?
yeah. Oh, was I? Was I false hydra all along?